Okay, welcome back. This is Liam O'Mara. You're on Office Hours with a Mad Professor. We're continuing our Conversations series, and tonight we have special guest Jason Call, who's running up in Washington's 2nd District, all along the coast there. Up, I believe there's like a rainforest and some lovely stuff in there. I'd love to hear more about the district too. Jason, yeah, how's it going?
It is going very well, Liam, Professor. I am very happy to be here. This is actually, I believe, the first time we've actually had a conversation face to face on video, even though we've known each other over social media for a couple of years. It really is
Right.
a pleasure to talk to you one on one now.
Yeah, I agree. I've known you a little bit from social media, tossing things back and forth here, and it's really nice to finally get a chance to chat with somebody, especially, getting a chance to chat with people that I actually respect. So it's one of the things that I'm enjoying the most about this whole process. Okay,
Absolutely,
so
absolutely.
why don't we start by, just, introducing yourself to our audience here. Give us your elevator pitch. Who are you and why are you in this race?
All right, Jason Call. I have been an activist on many, many fronts for the last 30 years. I tell everybody I get my start in the political movement, sort of movement politics, in when I was a sophomore in college, 1990, University of Washington, Desert Storm invasion, and I was down at the Federal Building, camping out, protesting, as a sophomore in college, and have continued my anti-war activities, throughout. So 30 plus years there. Got into single payer healthcare activism through my mother's experiences with the horrible health insurance system that eventually led to her early death, and I can talk about that a little bit more. But I've got skin in the game for healthcare, but really we all do, and so I've been a single payer activist for 15 plus years now. And then, of course, I work on environmental activism, labor activism. I was a high school teacher for almost 20 years, so I was a union member, union activist, building rep, executive board member, representative, elected to represent my district at the state representative assembly, and got into I was actually so pushy with union politics that the union bosses started to not like me. You're
I
asking us to do
mm,
too much.
I know
Um,
exactly how that feels.
you know how that goes.
Yep.
And of course, environmental politics. It gives me an opportunity to talk about where my district is. The rainforest part of Washington State is actually the Olympic National Forest, and that's over on the peninsula where Rebecca Parson is running,
Mm.
the 6th district. She's running against New Democrat Derek Kilmer.
Ah.
You probably know who he is.
Yep.
Um, so my district goes from the Snohomish-King County border, which King County is where Seattle is, and so my district starts about 20 miles north of Seattle,
Mhm.
in the Linwood-Edmonds area. With redistricting, now goes all the way up to the Canadian border. It stopped at Bellingham in Whatcom County before the redistricting, but now goes all the way up to the border. Includes Whidbey Island. In the Whidbey Island is actually the fourth largest island in the United States, right there in the middle of Puget Sound, and then in the San Juan Islands also. And so we're a pretty blue progressive district, but we're also extremely coastal.
Mhm.
We've got probably about 500 miles of coastline, and so when those tides start rising, we stand to be impacted. And one of the things that I'm really concerned about is that we start dealing with our own climate refugees, because we are going to have them here
Oh
in this
yeah.
district
Hmm.
in the next 30 years. So environmental activism, and then you know, well, that's my scope. Oh, education activism, right? I've talked about
Hmm.
education activism. I've testified in front of the House Education Committee down in the state
Hmm.
legislature, advocating for better policies for students. But a wide range of activisms over 30 years, and got into sort of more, I want to say, sort of aggressive political party politics when Bernie Sanders chose to run. Now, I had been involved in my local Democratic parties since Howard Dean ran in 2003, and I even caucused for Bill Clinton when I think I was 21 years old in '92 in the first election. And so,
Interesting.
I've dabbled in party politics, but and got more involved in sort of helping candidates out in 2003 with Howard Dean and Dennis Kucinich, and then Obama, and then really sort of got the wind under me with Bernie Sanders in 2015. Did a lot of organizing in the state for him. Bernie won the Washington caucus 73% in 2016, and part of that was due to me and other people who had been involved in local politics. We knew how the caucus system worked. We knew how to train people how to caucus, and we found all the people who were inspired by Bernie and said, here's what you have to do to help Bernie win in Washington. And we ended up with some pretty big numbers. A lot of us got elected to, we decided let's get into the Democratic Party and see if we can move the Democratic Party. I ended up getting myself elected to the Washington State Democrat Central Committee for 4 years. I was on the platform committee. I was on the platform committee for my county. Most recently, I was the parliamentarian for my county. We've all been redistricted now, so it's all a big shuffle on the state level as well. But that kind of activity prompted other people, other progressives, other Bernie people, really, to say, hey, you should take a crack at Larson. And so that's where we ended up in 2019. We said, okay, let's do this. We kind of felt things out around the district. You think we can do this? Who's going to support us? Didn't get as much support as we wanted, because building that support for a first time run, it's tough.
Not easy.
But in the 2020 race, and I'll give you all the things that we were up against. So first of all, No Name. I mean, I'm known in local activism politics, but sort of district wide, I'm a nobody. So No Name, we were at the bottom of the ballot of 8 names. So anybody who's scanning down that ballot and just looking for the D, they're going to hit Larson's name first. 3 of the 5 counties in our district did not print a voter guide. So if you wanted to actually read up about, and it was COVID conditions, so they were claiming like budget constraints, and but it's on the Secretary of State's website. You can click on the link. Well, who's doing that, right? Really. And we had a great voter guide statement too. I mean, I really feel like if people have been able to read that thing, we would have been there.
I hope they at least gave you a discount on that if they weren't going to print it, because they charged me like 10 grand for that.
One of the things about Washington State is if you are on the ballot, then you get into the voter guide for free. I mean,
nice.
That's it.
Okay.
you can make your statement, you can make your pitch. But we raised about $50,000, like a little over $50,000. And then it was COVID conditions, and we couldn't do any door knocking. We really could not get, we a little bit of text banking, a little bit of phone banking. We printed up some things, and I sat at the farmers markets weekend after weekend all over the district trying to get people out. But, we got almost 35,000 votes on that first run, which was really pretty incredible. And for people who don't know top 2 voting, it's just like California. We have top 2 voting. So however many names are on the ballot, top 2 vote getters in the primary, those are the 2 that go head to head. So we missed that second spot by about a little under 2,600 votes. That was 1% of the primary vote we got within.
Nice.
And so we were pretty happy with ourselves. We watching the vote returns for 10 days, because we're all mail-in ballot in Washington. For the first week of that, we were really like, this could go our way. This could easily go our way. The last few days of ballot counting, we were like, all right, it's kind of out of reach now. But we were on the edge of our seats for a week there, really thinking that we could, get that second spot next to Rick Larson. So Rick Larson has been in office for 22 years now. He got elected to his 11th term, I think it was, this last time around, or maybe it was his 10th term. But whatever, he's 22 years in. He beats, as we were talking about beforehand, he beats the challenger by a 2-to-1 margin in every election. So it's not a competitive district in terms of Democrat versus Republican. The only time that he ever came within a couple of points of losing his seat was in 2010. And you remember what happened in 2010. That was that gigantic red wave all across the country after Obama's first term. And he still held on to his seat. Beyond that, it's been 2-1. In fact, the Republicans don't invest in this district so much that it was a libertarian on the ballot next to him in 2018. That's how little Republicans, invest sort of at the institutional level, invest in this district because they know they can't win. So this is a great opportunity for a progressive and whatever you want to call him, he's a corporatist, very much so, and to have those ideas go head to head in the general election. Like when I go around talking to people in the district, there's no, I tell them there's no danger in voting for me. Like if it's me against a Republican, which is the extremely unlikely scenario, but they're like, in regular other elections, party primaries, people will say, well, we want this Democrat. This Democrat has proven that they can beat Republicans, so this is a safe Democrat. So it's hard for a challenger to break in that way. That doesn't exist in my district at all. Rick will beat a Republican. I'll beat a Republican. So the best thing for the district is have that policy debate that we have in 22 years never been able to have. And so that's how I'm selling myself to all of the local party organizations that I go to and have been to over the last 3-4 months now.
Exactly. And those the so-called jungle primaries present a really great opportunity to sort of push the dial here, to kind of like push back on this corporate narrative. I don't know, I'm thinking of how often Nancy Pelosi was consistently reelected, because even though we had jungle primaries for a number of years now, no one else had gotten on there. So it was always just crushing whatever Republicans gets on there.
Right.
So, I'm cheering on Dems in that district is good for all of us. There's no downside. It doesn't matter. Whatever Dem is on the ballot is going to be the one who wins the seat, period.
Right. Well, and then in the case of Pelosi, because Shahid was on the ballot next to her,
exactly.
and then she wouldn't debate him,
right? Which she hasn't done with any Republicans anyway. Yeah. She hasn't done with anybody. But it was the first time that she actually had to face another Democrat on the ballot, which was great.
Yeah, yeah. Well, people ask me about that in my district. Are you gonna debate Larson? You're gonna debate Larson? And I said Larson won't debate me.
Right.
Larson won't debate me pre-primary. He may be forced into it by some local parties, because I do have local party support here. We've got 9 legislative districts in 5 counties, and so all of them have their little local parties. Like just this morning, I was meeting with the Skagit County Democrats. Thursday night, I met with the 40th Legislative District Democrats, and so I've been doing that with all 14 of these parties. But I have the open support of 3 out of 5 county chairs, and a number of legislative district chairs are also supporting me. I count 3 out of 9. So, I have the open support of almost half of the chairs in the district, and some of them probably support me on a little bit quieter level because they don't want to get in trouble. You know how party politics goes.
Yep.
But I have support here, and unlike a lot of sort of the blockage that I got last time, sort of the roadblocks that I hit last time, I have people much more openly willing to give to make sure the process is fair for me this time around. And kind of how that goes is people who have a little bit of power in the system can kind of fudge things one way or the other, and it's just you feel like, all right, things are really just stacked against me from the get-go, and I'm not feeling that so much this time around. I feel like people in the district, in those like local party members in the district, I've always had my supporters, but others are really like, oh, you know what? He's not, like, I got called last time, this is just a vanity campaign. You're just wasting everybody's time. Well, I came out with 35,000 votes. That wasn't a vanity campaign, and nobody has said anything like that to me this time around.
Good. And so, staying in the fight is a good way of actually overcoming that too. And actually presenting a realistic vision, realistic chance of success here. And again, in a district that is going safely to vote Democratic, all you're doing is giving voters a real choice, which they haven't had in 20 years. Yeah.
Well, and so I just talk a little bit about some of the things in the district. Like this is a very climate crisis aware district. I said we got 500 miles of coastline. So I met with the Skagit County Democrats today, which intersects with the 40th Legislative District. And since our state legislative session has just ended, these legislators came back to the meeting to talk about the things that have been accomplished over the legislative session. Washington is Democrat whole House, Senate, and governor.
Oh, yeah.
And so that doesn't mean we always get the things that we want, because
No.
we have plenty of corporate Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
But these legislators came back to the district and they started talking about greening our ferry system, the Washington State ferry system, which is right now all but one, I think, are diesel vehicles, and it's some pretty heavy pollution, because we got 20 plus ferries running across the Puget Sound, and we got they're running all day every day. So there's a fair amount of pollution there. So having those ferries turned into electric ferries is really going to do a lot for decarbonization here in the district. So they're talking about transportation issues. They're talking about working class issues. And so I'm in the meeting. When I get my turn to speak, I get to say, hey, all the things that you guys are proud of with your legislators right there, like they're doing a good job. You've got a really good group of Democratic legislators here. Those are the things that I am best in the mindset and prioritize myself to support them in their job locally. Whatever I can do at the federal level will support what they're doing locally, and really contrast that with Rick and his priorities, right? Takes a ton of fossil fuel money, takes a ton of military industrial complex money, who is the person who is going to serve us locally better?
Right, for sure. There are, so many issues here that I already want to touch on. So it's going to be hard to kind of I'm going to have to keep circling back to some of these, because, mentioning union activism, that's a big one for me. I'm from a solidly union family, been in labor unions my whole life. But and then, the anti-war stuff. I mean, I'm with you there. Interestingly enough, I was on the other side in terms of the Bill Clinton support in '92. I did not want. I mean, I saw a lot of populist language and DLC money, so I was very skeptical there in the primary. But whatever, you get what you get in the generals.
I was young. Like I said, I was 21, and I really didn't know anything about
get you.
Politics at all.
I totally get you. But the similar,
No,
I totally get you. But it's similar in terms of the Gulf War. Because one of the things that first turned me on to I noticed is I pay a lot of attention to foreign policy was one of the first things that got me involved in history and at least especially as U.S. history relates to the world, because I tend to focus on world history, Middle East, Europe, but U.S. foreign policy is a huge area for me and has been for a long time. And I noticed Bernie Sanders in his first term, because he got into Congress and immediately went nuts on the brush to war. Because he was elected in 1990. So he's there for the 91 Gulf War. And it's just this is stupid. Why are we doing this? I'm like, yes, someone is saying it. This is great. Because it is so rare to find those anywhere in our politics. People willing to stand on principle. Your Barbara Lees and your Bernie Sanderses are really rare.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, that's something that I don't know if you noticed that recently I kind of joined forces with Shahid and Rebecca Parson and Stephanie Gallardo and Shervin Azami and maybe a girl, and we press released on our sort of opinions and platform, I guess it would be, surrounding what's going on with Russia Ukraine right now, and it's very part of what we said in our presentation of that is Congress has no diversity of voices when it comes to war. It is the State Department or the Joint Chiefs or whatever, they throw something on the table and everybody just sort of walks lockstep in it. The media, and nobody questions. You end up with an echo chamber, and people like Judith. What was her name? Judith Miller, writing articles that are basically parroting what the government wants us to hear, rather than being any kind of critical journalism. And we need voices of dissent in Congress. We absolutely have to be. I'll tell you, one of the things that got me in the Iraq War, one of the best speeches, and I know people hesitate to bring his name up, but Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia gave a scathing speech to the Senate on the floor, and he basically said, "These are the gravest matters that a nation can ever have in front of them. Do we go to war?" And this chamber is silent. And that speech really just got me, and I was like, God, we have a Congress that walks in lockstep with the war.
We have a Congress that has abdicated its constitutional responsibility, and in fact, your incumbent has voted to do that. I mean, way back before when you had under the W administration, he was out there like, no, Congress shouldn't have to vote on war with Iran. If W wants to bomb Iran, he's got my support already. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you just like preemptively giving power to the executive to bomb whoever the hell they want. I mean, that has to stop. And instead, they just renew this every single year. There's just no criticism.
Yeah. Well, he's never voted against an NDAA. The proposal to withdraw from Afghanistan, I think was on the table 6 times. He voted against it every time. Every time there is any kind of cut to the military budget, he votes against it. Any kind of, even the 0.25%, they wanted to take 0.25% away from the military for something, nothing. Anytime individual programs like cuts to the F-35 program, cuts to nuclear programs, votes against all of them. You know?
Right, every single one of them. I mean, and here you had back in 2008, and you mentioned backing Obama there. One of the things that helped his campaign to take off against Clinton was the Iraq War vote, and just how polarizing that issue was. And Larson went on record in 2008 saying, "No, we're going to be in Iraq for the next 10 years." I mean, there's just
he didn't say he said it could be 30, 35 years. We've got a statement from him like projecting, we may be there for 30, 35 years. You know, and by the way, with what's going on with Ukraine right now, that's exactly you've probably read the stories, but Adam Smith, chair of House Armed Services, just a week ago said, we may be looking at funding an insurgency like we did in Afghanistan back in the 1980s. Like, they want to create another Mujahideen situation. Like, did you not just see how that turned out?
Right. And do you not see the kind of, people who would be signing up for that? I mean, okay. I mean, who did we'll be backing as in the Mujahideen? I mean, the kind of people that we picked out there just straight up followed the British Empire's logic of picking the most reactionary and conservative people possible and then arming and supporting them. The Mujahideen absolutely bit us in the ass afterwards, and now we've got like literal neo-Nazi militias fighting with the Ukrainian military. And we want to like arm them. Sure, let's because of course giving guns to hardcore white supremacists and white nationalists, that's not going to bite us in the ass at all. And I mean, tons of American radicals going there to train and then coming back. No, that's not going to bite us in the ass at all.
Well, I'm reading more and more. There's more about this that is being revealed as time goes on. But I'm reading more and more about, there are fascists, elected fascists in Ukraine. They're part of city councils and oblast councils, and they've been elected to some pretty high positions, and then that the Azov battalion and others are actually at the core of multi-continental militias, and you're right. I mean, just the fact that we would think about arming these people, these are the people that we want to put weapons and military know-how in the hands of. What could go wrong? Right.
Yeah. And I get okay, clearly Russia is the aggressor here. Clearly NATO expansion is provocative, but we can't say that that's the cause of it in the same way, because Putin still has to take responsibility for what he's doing. So this is clearly 100%. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. And between the two, like, any country has the right to defend itself. Great. I'm totally on the side of Ukraine defending itself. Does that mean we have to arm far-right militias? And is there a good guy in this fight at all other than the invasion part? Because, yeah, Russia's a neo-fascist state with tons of white supremacist militias, and so is Ukraine. And you mentioned elected... Oh, I mean, I have seen photos in multiple offices, and it disgusts me that the U.S. media will not draw attention to this. They're talking to someone, they're interviewing some mayor or whatever, and there's photos of like Stepan Bandera on the wall, who's like a literal Nazi war criminal, who's responsible for 100,000 Poles being killed. I mean, hello.
Here is, I get this guy, Oleg Tianbok, who is a far-right leader in Lviv Oblast. Oleg Tianbok, yeah, that's his name. And there's a picture of Biden shaking hands with this guy, like chummy shaking hands. And then there's another picture of this guy doing the Nazi salute. You know, like, wow, is our government really not paying attention to this, or are they just saying, you know,
or are they complicit? Yeah, it's a hard one. Yeah. You know that meme that floats around every now and then with the little Nazi guy. Are we the baddies? Like, you know, I'm like, oh gosh. I mean, it just hurts me, like, to think, like, because you want to support your country, love your country. Why is our government so often on the wrong side? The American people are great. The American government, not always so much.
Yeah, and the American people are very, very vulnerable to. We've been conditioned since World War II to be patriots, and you know, there's been such a seeding of we're number one, that, you know, I grew up in England. I spent the 70s and the first couple of years of the 80s in England. My dad was an Air Force officer, and he was stationed over there, and we did not, you know, I grew up as an English person. I felt like I was British. And I saw a lot of this sort of flag waving about the royal family, really didn't understand it. But there wasn't like when I moved to America in '82, and it was weird to me to see those sort of levels of, you know, the whole we're number one, because it's much, growing up in England, you know, it's much more cosmopolitan?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's definitely more so than here, for sure.
Everybody vacationed in Mallorca, you know, and then people, you know, we would go to France. We would take the ferry over to France, and it was, you know, we felt like we were part of a pretty diverse continent. Not that England doesn't have its problems with racism, absolutely, absolutely does.
Yeah, don't get me started on the English Defence League.
Right, but and I was reading about the Irish Freedom Party, and I was like, oh God, you know, I support the unification of Ireland and Northern Ireland, but not with those guys.
Right.
You know? So, I mean, don't pick the Nazis. So, so coming over to America, it was odd to me to see these levels of, I guess you would call it just patriotism. It just, you know, I have a much more rounded worldview than a lot of Americans, especially like when I moved here to Washington. We moved to a very rural area. I did not go to school with almost any white people. I think by junior high there was maybe one or two black people in the whole school, and it was racist culture. It was, you know, it was ugly. But also not at all worldly. It was just, you know, it was small town. And a lot of America is like that. They don't sort of have a wider view of what the world is and what could be sort of in cooperation.
And it's honestly not really our fault in any way. It's simply a matter of like local demography and your exposure. It's not surprising that your cities tend to be far more liberal, far more cosmopolitan, much further left than the countryside, because you're surrounded by other people and you realize, living next to people, you know what? I guess they're not really a threat. I moved a long time ago further out into the I moved out into the sticks, basically. I moved for a long time in the high desert, and today I live up on a mountain. But I grew up in the Long Beach area, and where I grew up, like, you could walk a block in any direction. You're like Little Cambodia, you know, Hispanic areas, everywhere you go, like massive ethnic diversity, and no one cared. It was just normal. So it wasn't like threatening. You got a chance to meet people, see them, for who they are, realize that they're just people like you. But
Yeah.
if you're not around other people, it's a lot easier to fall for, people's, xenophobic arguments, because you really have nothing to base it on other than the scare tactics. And our media is really, really good at that. You mentioned the turn after World War II. And oh my God, if you look back at earlier speeches from American politicians, you look back, regardless of party, we used to have major politicians that would be like, okay, loyal to the country, always loyal to the government when it deserves it, and
Yeah.
they used to call out that kind of excessive patriotism and certainly call out nationalism. And since World War II, we've radically shifted, and it's just gotten worse and worse decade after decade. By the time you got into the 1980s, Reagan was mainstreaming a lot of John Birch Society-like conspiracy theories. Trump didn't come out of nowhere. We've been primed for neo-fascism for a long time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I talk about, I don't talk about it often because it doesn't come up often. It's reasonable for me to say, listen, I grew up in a racist household. My father was Air Force. He grew up in Florida. He wasn't like he wasn't going to be, he's not aggressive about it, but he has sort of that internalized racism of the South where, he just felt like white people were better. He talked about the black people that he served in the military, officers who were, disciplined versus, what he would, you know where that is going with the cultural difference. But that's what I grew up with. And I was isolated out in the boonies. But when I left actually it was two transitions. I went to high school in Tacoma. I drove 25 miles every day to Tacoma to do the International Baccalaureate program because they didn't have an honors program out in the boonies. So I did the IB program in Tacoma, got exposed to a lot more diversity there, and really started like questioning this bullshit line that I grew up with. When you're in a military family, you don't argue back about that kind of stuff. But in my mind, I was just like, I don't feel like I trust my dad anymore because this is on these issues for sure. He's a complete bullshitter. And certainly when I went to college, I grew up in a Republican household. I want to say almost obviously, but I was, I would have been considered a young Republican when I was in high school. But when I went to college and got more exposure, lived in the dorms, like you said, met a whole bunch of people from a whole bunch of different places. What I had been feeling was wrong, and knowing my dad was bullshitting me about just kind of like was like there right in front of me, and I was like, I reject everything. And then I was mad at my dad because I really felt like he had lied to me about people. Like, you feel like you're lied to like that, and then you feel like you missed out on a lot of opportunities because of these prejudices that you were raised with. So, and then I just became a social activist, and ended up with a political science degree. That was my first degree.
There's honestly something brilliant about that I've tried to raise for a lot of people, especially since, my experience being out in rural areas here, engaging with people in overwhelmingly red districts, I've had an opportunity to have a lot of conversations with people and hear where they are. And what has frequently bothered me, and I hear this a lot from liberal Democrats, is this desire to just shut people out completely and assume that there's something congenitally wrong with them. And to me, that's really not any better as an idea, because it's sort of assuming that people are irredeemable. And as soon as you do that, you're kind of taking a step toward like a kind of like essentialist thinking, which is really not that distinguishable from racism itself. It's applied in a different way, but of course we can use the term a lot more loosely. Think about the way we use like racist when we're talking about Islamophobia, which, obviously Islam is not a race, but it still kind of fits. Or like, opposition to like, Hispanic or Latino people, even though tons of them are like as white gets, it's a wide range, but we still use the term. It's in a very loose sense. It's always sort of bothered me, because what happens when you actually start talking to people, you realize they have the potential to change and grow. It takes exposure, it takes patience, it takes talking to people and not immediately, shooting them down as an idiot. If you say like, you're an asshole, you're an asshole racist and I can't talk to you, then they're going to stay an asshole racist and they're going to dig their heels in and they're going to get worse. And the next thing you know, they're snapping Nazi salutes. If you hear those ideas and you instead patiently ask questions about them, and you start asking, and like seed things with your questions, like, well, have you thought about this? Or, have you met this person or this, like start leaving behind breadcrumbs. People can find their way out of that. It just takes a lot of patience, and people are much more prone, I think, to throwing up those bubbles and balkanizing themselves, which means that we're essentially tuning out half the country. And that ultimately is going to condemn the country as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll one of the things that I would hope to do as an office holder here, and listen, I will shit talk the Republican Party, the Republican Party up there that really feeds on that. I mean, they're charlatans, right? So they're sowing.
The party knows what it's doing.
They're just dangling the hook in the water with the red meat.
Right.
And they're getting what they want out of it. So they're complete charlatans. And I will trash that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get to actually talk to people, and can help them see where they're being fooled, it does take patience. I don't always have the patience to do it, like depending upon what the situation is and depending upon how somebody comes at me, somebody comes at me biting, I can bite right back. And sometimes it's not the most prudent thing to do, but
I know what you mean.
It is good when you get into those conversations and you can kind of unwind some of the knots that these people have been conditioned to have.
For sure. And honestly, we shouldn't have to expect, politicians or anybody else to do this for us. We shouldn't be turning to like our public intellectuals, political figures, whatever, to sort these issues out. It should be within our own networks, within our own families, our friends, because if people trust you more, if they have an existing relationship with you, there's something in them that's going to be a little bit more prone to taking you seriously, as long as you're hearing them, you're talking, you're engaging patiently, and you can help people to draw them out of these extremist views. The party, fuck the Republican Party. I mean, they've signed into this stuff a long, long time ago. Reagan ran in the 60s on white supremacy, and and they proved it was a workable model. And there's a massive sea change in the 1960s in our politics, where instead of having substantive differences on the economy, and we can come back to that when we can talk about some of the new Democrat policies later here, like they used to have really substantive disagreements on like political and economic issues, and they don't anymore. They largely agree on war, on the economy, and everything else. What they disagree on is the degree to which you can be a racist douche. And the Republicans have just thrown everything, all their eggs into that basket. Yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, they know exactly what they're doing, and they deserve no respect for it at all. But people get snookered, and that's a difference for me.
Well, I think a lot of the, you think about the way they create these narratives, like the voter suppression, right? Mm-hmm. Well, what's the big deal? And this is the arguments that I still have. I don't talk with my father very much, and when we do, it's over text, so it can be very terse. And he wants to bait me on some things, and so we have he tells me about I can tell when he's been listening to Tucker Carlson. Don't talk to me about critical race theory. Are you kidding me? But what's wrong with somebody having a voter ID without ever having the ability to put yourself in the position of mm-hmm. any number of situations where you might not be able to get it, and then you want to say, you were in the military, man, you fought, quote unquote fought for your country. Like, why would you not want everybody to have the opportunity to vote? Isn't that what you fought for? Mm-hmm. And then you realize you go back 40 years to Paul Weyrich and the
yes,
and you see that video,
mm-hmm.
that minute 30 seconds of video of Paul Weyrich saying, quite frankly, we don't want people to vote,
mm-hmm.
and that our leverage in the elections goes up when the voting populace goes down.
Yeah.
And you show that to people and say, this has been their plan for 40 fucking years.
Yes.
Are you kidding me? Pay attention.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to get past a lot of times because they're only going to hear a particular framing. And one of the things I've seen repeatedly with Democrats all across this country is they will repeatedly fall into rhetorical traps set by the right. The right is simply more clever about its manipulation, so they pick the language that's actually going to get their point across in a very simple way. And it forces Democrats into these what's ultimately an untenable position, because you're trying to have an argument on the facts when it's not really the facts that kind of matter, that hooked people in the first place. It's an emotional connection to it.
Right.
You have to understand what drew them into it and then counter it in a way there. Because obviously on the facts, all these things come apart. I mean, the fact that they check registrations for every vote that's cast means that it's impossible to fake it. You can't just go in a bunch of dead people voting. It gets caught. I love actually using, I did this, I've done this for a number of years now. I've used your state as an example because you are all mail-in. And when people freaked out about mail-in during the pandemic, we're like, okay, cool. So we've had a quarter century of data to study here, and we've found a 0.00004% fraud count. I mean, it's a statistical non-occurrence. It doesn't happen. It can't even flip a race for dog catcher, much less a federal office. So it's a completely manufactured problem, but it's manufactured in such a way and with such language that it plays on people's fears. And if you're playing on an irrational fear, it's a lot harder to counter that on the facts. And it just gets us spinning our gears, and they keep winning with them. I mean, these issues, they drive me nuts, honestly, the degree to which people fall for that kind of stuff. Ugh. Okay, there's a good point that you hit earlier too that I really want to I can see some good meat in this one, right? Because you're a Medicare for all person, so am I, single payer, and again, for anybody who is not aware of this yet, Medicare for all does not mean the currently existing Medicare. The bills massively improve things and add dental and
National
vision and
improved Medicare.
Exactly,
for all.
the whole NEMA tag as well. Yeah, I mean, because honestly, Bernie sticking with Medicare as the name was, to me, kind of a blunder in terms of the marketing of it. We should have used something else from the beginning, because a lot of people who have it now, I have big copays and everything else. Well, you wouldn't under this bill. Anyway, we agree there.
Single payer is not good, because then you have to explain what single payer means.
Right.
Single payer is a wonky term. So,
yeah, I mean, all of it. Yeah, exactly. It's the same old rhetorical traps. But
Britain did it right. National Health Service. There you go.
Nice and easy. And honestly, that's what actually Nixon was hoping to run here, which it just blows me away that back in the 60s we were talking about a UK style healthcare system, and now we can't even talk about replacing the insurance industry.
You know what? It's so funny, because I was talking about Nixon with I was up in Bellingham yesterday, talking with some constituents, and we talked about the EPA and how the EPA was a Nixon program. And isn't it funny that the Democrats that we have in my lifetime, after Carter, everybody after Reagan has been more conservative than Nixon was, for God's sake, I mean,
honestly, and really when Reagan was running, when he got into national politics, his views on so many other issues were so much more moderate. His views on immigration, would be unusual in the Democratic Party today, much less as a Republican. And Reagan was in many ways an overt neo-fascist. I mean, there was a lot of really deeply authoritarian and racist elements to it. But even there, he wouldn't win a Republican primary today.
There was, I just actually just retweeted it. I think it was my last tweet, was a Pew Research poll that showed how much more conservative Congress has gotten over the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. And it's we are deeply more conservative in both the Democrats. And it's so funny, because they came out saying Biden's got the most progressive policies ever. I don't know. I don't know what they're thinking. Maybe it's relative to the times. Maybe they're, I don't know, but it's not a thing. No, we are Biden. Biden is, just as Obama was. Biden is a moderate Republican from the 70s.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Obama and the Clintons. Yeah, they're essentially Eisenhower Republicans, and 60s Republicans.
Only more pro-war.
Honestly, yeah, that's the same. Eisenhower was commendably anti-war, so or at least anti-war for us. He was perfectly willing to overthrow other governments, but don't get me started here. We'll be talking for hours. But on the healthcare issue, you said something that really caught my attention, because when I got into this, when I was trying to talk about healthcare, and I really struggled with this personally, to talk about it, in a personal way, because it's such a painful personal issue for me. One of the things that really offends me more than anything else about the way we do healthcare in this country as a whole. I married my childhood sweetheart. She's my best friend, whatever, and things were great. And within about a year and a half of getting married, I mean, she'd had some problems before, some depression episodes, whatever, but nothing very serious. But about a year and a half into it, she had her first psychotic break. And then she wound steadily downward from there with schizoaffective disorder, which is right between it's like the worst of both schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. You have the wild mood swings and the deep depressions, but your manias become like literal psychotic delusions. And she would get violently dangerous, harmful to other people. She'd be talking to God, aliens, all kinds of stuff, and the healthcare system just does not care. We struggled so much. I mean, it took forever to get any kind of support from her at all, to get anything out of like Social Security or anything like that, because she clearly couldn't work. But they continually tried to throw her off of benefits. It was just a constant hassle there. And because she could not get the treatment that she needed, she kept deteriorating to the point where she needed full-time care. I finally had to step out of it because it was literally the only way we could get full-time care for her was to not have my income, which it broke my heart to have to do that. But the way it was often put to me at the time, especially since the mental institutions were closed in the 80s and everything else, and the fact that we never developed proper universal health care, is essentially we criminalized mental illness. Until she actually kills somebody and goes to jail, she'll never get good treatment. And like, really? I mean, prison treatment is still not great, but that's all you've got? Either go completely broke supporting people, trying to help out there, or people just die. And we waste so much human potential in this country.
It is amazing to me, because what you describe, and then what I have described with the situation with my mother, and I'll just briefly go through that again. And I've told the story a number of times, and I feel like I can get through it better each time, because it's pretty crushing.
Mm-hmm.
But my mom had routine bladder reconstruction surgery. She was 59-year-old woman, and she had gone in for it was so routine that the insurance covered recovery time was a single day. And that's where things went wrong, because what had happened was during the surgery, the surgeon had nicked her bowel. And so she did not feel well enough to go home, and she begged the doctors not to send her home. And they said, we have to, because your insurance won't cover anymore. So within 24 hours, because my sister lived in Albuquerque, she had been checked on and was found, I guess unconscious on the floor of her apartment, rushed back to the hospital, and was put in an induced coma because of the sepsis of the ruptured bowel. And for 3 months, she was in the ICU on a ventilator. And I went down there. I have a sister who lives in Albuquerque, a sister who lives in Wisconsin. And my sister from Wisconsin and I both flew down to Albuquerque, and we saw our mother in the ICU. And we were both like, the ICU nurse, who happened to be a friend of mine, was like, we're doing the best we can, but this does not look good. Make preparations and that kind of thing. So she came out of that. But for 2 years was in a care facility, a nursing care facility, while she was essentially learning how to walk again. And spent the next 8 years, like she was a working woman, never worked again. Was on a walker, was on disability, was on Social Security, reliant on, and she had just gotten divorced from my father too. And he was, as you probably know, coming out of the 50s and 60s, she had only had a job once us kids were out of school. And she was very much reliant on my father for income and whatever. So she had a house, but she didn't really have any funds to help her take care of that. I mean, she was an invalid. She was an invalid for the last 8 years of her life on a walker. And then she died, and eventually died from complications, because she was never very well again. After going through that, she was just she probably had 30 surgeries in 10 years. Various things that were complications from this. And, you think of of insurance as a gamble, right? I mean, insurance is there. You got a risk pool. People are your risk pool, and they're charging us premiums, and they're essentially betting that they're going to make more money off of us than they have to pay out, and that's where all of this stuff comes from. That's the insurance model for healthcare is a failed model from the start, like the for-profit insurance, because you are going to have people drawing the line on where you don't get any care anymore, and it's all done by bean counters. But the human cost of it, like you experienced and like my family experienced, my point is, everybody has got to have some connection to somebody, family, friend, neighbor, where they've got a story that is just a horrific story. It was like, God, if things weren't done differently, like right at the beginning, where you recognize the problems, your diagnosis, and just take care of things right then and there, that you don't deal with all of it's the human cost and the financial cost that is incurred because of the for-profit system. Of course, it all goes to, people making money off of it, but to the average person out here in the world, it's just devastating. So I guess my point is, I don't understand why more people just haven't gotten up and demanded. Where is that titration point where, like, all right, people are really willing to move on this, and I still don't think we're there yet. It's weird to me.
Well, because a lot of our media figures, a lot of our politicians are out there saying there's no way we can pass this, blah, blah, blah. Republicans won't do it, so we can't do it. And, just deal with it, suck it up. And, what they end up doing, it gets back to some of the rhetorical issues too, because they buy into like the cost issue. How many Democrats talk about, well, we can't afford Medicare for all? Bullshit. Yeah. We pay more than it would cost. It literally already costs more.
Just released their report. They literally, February 25th, I think was the date on that report. Congressional Budget Office says Medicare for all helps people more, costs less.
Right. It would literally save money. I mean, it's astonishing, because not only do you have the tremendous human cost of wasted lives, wasted potential, people not getting the preventive care that they need, people not getting the care in time that they need, people putting off care all the time, when they have serious problems because they can't afford it. But on top of that, it's cheaper to do it that way. We spend the most by far per capita, and we have the worst outcomes too, because we have lower life expectancies, more health issues by far. And everyone's just like, oh, well, it's because people don't eat well and everything else, and it's and you've got all this bullshit that floats around. That, I
mean, we can talk about our food systems.
Sure, no, we absolutely can. And there's a ton of problems, but it's not the whole problem. It would be a small part of it. It would be a factor, but there's tons of fast food in Britain too, but they have better preventive care. And because there isn't a profit motive, the physicians are more likely to talk about those things too. You don't have like the people being paid essentially to be pill peddlers, kind of like pushing on, like, oh, here's our 5-minute visit. Here's some drugs, go home. We can actually talk about how you can improve your life. As soon as you introduce the profit motive into it, you end up with, as you say, bean counters. And I loved that. Oh gosh. Okay, so here's the thing again. Democrats keep falling for these things. We don't attack the kind of rhetoric that we hear in the right ways. You had Sarah Palin saying, well, we'll have death panels. We'll have death panels deciding when grandma dies. They already exist. And what you should have, and if you didn't have a Congress that was bought and paid for by the insurance lobby, you would have had Democrats saying, we already have death panels that are condemning grandma, and she's supporting them. But they didn't.
Well, this gives me an opportunity to talk about my opponent.
Thank you.
Because he came to Congress through the Washington State Dental Lobby. He was a lobbyist, I think from 91 to 98. And the Washington State Dental Lobby is arguably the most powerful medical lobby in the state. So he got elected to the Snohomish County Council, only did half a term before he got elevated to Congress, and a lot of the money in his first run came from dentists. And I don't want to badmouth dentists because I love my dentist. He's actually really progressive. And dental care is definitely needed and should be covered,
and is in National Improved Medicare for All.
In Medicare for All, but that's, I mean, he has served his entire 22 years in Congress with the attitude of a lobbyist. That's, I mean, for him, that's the system. That's how the system works. And so if you go to my website, and he has said over and over again, he will not support a single payer system. I mean, we've got him on record multiple times saying he's not interested in Medicare for All. He won't support single payer. But the dismissiveness, like if you go to my website, and I have to say that my campaign, and in particular, my Oppo research guy and my press director, his name's Ben Karpelman, and he's at Snowcialism. On Twitter, he has put together some gold standard research on Rick Larson's career, documenting money that he has taken and votes that he has made, and really constructing a narrative, because a lot of the money you can tie to, well, he got money from these people in this year, and this is what was going on in this year, and they have not given to him since, but they gave to him then. And this is how he voted on this.
And they got what they wanted. They bought his vote.
Yep. And you can see it's really gold standard. But there's a video clip on that page. It's called Rick's Receipts. Well, my website's callforcongress.com, and the Rick's Receipts tab is all of this beautiful research, which I have been encouraging other progressive candidates to do. We actually did a training session for a number of candidates on how to dig through open secrets, the FEC files, and the congressional record. And so I'll tell people, here's the key, because a lot of Democrats will vote in line with the majority of other Democrats on final bills. And so it appears as if they have like a Democratic voting record. But when you start to look at the votes in the amendment process from when a bill gets introduced to that final bill that goes up for the vote, right? That's where you see the death by 1,000 cuts. And that's where the dirt is on Larson. And we have exposed all of it, So anyway, there's a video on that Rick's Receipts page on my website of a local constituent. It's a town hall meeting. And they're telling him, like, are you saying you don't care that the people are, in these dire straits, that they can't afford their medications, and that you're not going to do anything, that you think people, because his line is, people don't want a single payer system, and he gets these heartfelt, people trying to talk to him about the human cost of this issue, and he just turns away from them. I mean, the guy has no heart at all. So we got to have people with compassion in Congress, and I think compassion in Congress is sorely lacking.
Yeah, you need compassion in Congress, but you also need stones. You need people willing to talk about these things, because you'll get someone like that saying, well, the public doesn't support single payer. Well, that's true if they don't know what it is. Right. And you've shown this over and over again. There's tons of polling data on this. If you explain what it is, everyone's on board. But if you play along with the disingenuous Republican narrative that our employer offered insurance and that's healthcare, it's not. It's just the middleman. You're paying for the middleman. Everyone would get to keep their own physicians. You would get your doctors. I mean, and everyone's just going, well, that's what Obama said. But Obama wasn't talking about single payer. He was talking about a completely different system. So yeah, he was wrong there, but that's fine. He was pushing a Republican plan.
He was pushing a corporatist plan. Yeah. And every time somebody talks about the ACA, I tell them I was on the ACA. It was terrible. Like, I was low income and I got subsidized for the premiums, but I wouldn't have been able to afford those premiums. And the worst part about it is for the few months that I was in between jobs and was on the ACA, I couldn't use the benefits. I could barely figure out what the benefits are. And I literally did not go to see the doctor because I was like, I don't know what kind of bills I'm going to get on the backside of this, because I'm only on the bronze plan, Right. So yeah, I mean that's not.
Yeah, we got one good thing out of the ACA. They can't deny people with pre-existing conditions.
And then now that I have employer-based insurance, and it's pretty, it's Blue Cross Blue Shield, but it's still It's better. I mean, my wife and I'm newly remarried 4 years ago now, but she came from not having insurance. She was, working an office job, didn't have insurance. Her kids were on Apple Care, which is basically Washington State's Medicare. So that, here in Washington State, we do make sure that kids are covered for doctor services. So that's good here. But she herself didn't have it. So yeah, I mean, I have decent enough employer-based health care, but for people who can't, it's just I can't understand. For
Yeah.
people who have to deal with the ACA, they're not getting good care out of it. I know they're not. I know I was.
And all it's going to do is it's going to play into those Republican arguments where they can say, see, government can't do anything right. You're covered through the ACA, and see, they mess it all up. So why would you trust them for single payer? And
that is why
falling into a trap.
I'm opposed to the public option. Because the public option, I've said for years now, the public option is designed to kill Medicare for exactly those reasons. Public option will take in all the neediest people, all the people who are least able to pay, and they'll say, oh my God, we can't afford all of this.
Right.
Well, listen, people, and then they'll say, look, government can't do it. This is a government program. It's broken. We don't have the money for it. Of course, we don't have the money. And what people need to understand is how insurance works, as we were talking about the risk and the gambling. Well, the biggest risk pool is every fucking buddy. That is the biggest risk pool.
That lowers costs. And I mean,
that's what lowers the cost.
It's basic actuarial maths,
and then it is there for everybody at a lower cost for everybody. And this is not hard.
It is mathematically impossible for private insurance to get the same, results as Medicare. You can offer a better plan for less money because of that risk pool. The public option, though, is basically a handout to tons of these corporations because it would increase the spending. Tons of people would still have it. They would still make tons of cash. And then you'd basically have the federal government bailing those companies out by taking on the worst parts of the risk pool and then drowning the taxpayers. So we'd go from paying twice as much as any other developed country to about 3 times as much. And you'd be able to use it as a good argument again for why government can't do things. The fact that any Democrat is standing up and saying, oh, public option, or what did Buttigieg call it? Medicare for those who want it. People, it's just, as far as I'm concerned, you're doing the Republicans' job for them. You might as well be a Republican.
For sure.
I can't take that stuff seriously at all. But to me, the problem there is the politicians are disingenuous about it. They're following the money. Their nose is taken into the cash. They want it. They're going to, lobbyist money. I'd like to because I'm a historian, I'll make points like, hey, you used to be able to walk onto the floor of the House of Representatives and offer an envelope full of cash in the 19th century. We still do that. We just pass it through the internet now and you don't see it. Yeah. But they're still doing it. They're following the money. Right, the representatives are, and they're going to do whatever they need to do there. The problem here is that the people don't know it.
From a lobbying background,
right?
That is his view of how politics works.
And I don't blame the voters at all for falling for this because what they're hearing, at least, is there does seem to be a difference between the two parties. The Democrats seems like they're saying nicer things. They don't know that they're bought and paid for, so they don't understand. I get why. Just in terms of the charisma, somebody like Buttigieg would do well and people would like him. But if you look at where the money comes from and you look at the policies he's pursuing, you're talking about a Republican.
Yeah.
And it's just selling out, the voters, if we can't raise awareness of that.
And this is one of the things, again, I did contrasting myself with Larson. So the American Conservative Union, those guys, they call themselves the premier conservative organization in the country, the people who host CPAC every year. They actually do candidate scorecards, and they do them for all Republicans and all Democrats. And so if you are a sitting member of Congress, you have a scorecard on the ACU. And it's all based on what their priorities are. So it's not every piece of legislation that goes through, but if they had an opinion and they wanted it to go a certain way, they are going to score you on your vote on that. Would you believe, and a lot of people in my district thought I was lying when I said this, even people who are like supportive of me, they're like, oh, you can't say, Larson's not that bad. And I was like, hold on a second, because I got the goods. Of 230-ish sitting Democrats, Rick Larson is the 35th most conservative in terms of his career voting record in alignment with the ACU. Now, I was stunned because I didn't think he was that bad. And I know about all of his money and I know about all of his votes. And I was like, I knew he was bad. I would have put him in the top third of most corporate Democrats, right? Most right-leaning Democrats. But actually, he is in the 85th or the 15th percentile. Which way would you go on that? 85th percentile or 15th percentile? But, he's actually twice as conservative on that measure. If you go from 30% to 15%, he's twice as conservative on that measure as I thought he was.
And you're paying attention to a lot of these things, which again, we have to be fair and honest about this. And I hate when people do like the kind of vote shaming or blame the voters for not having the time for this. We're deliberately worked to the bone and left with no free time to spend looking at these things. So we have to count on the mailers that come to our house, what's on the television there. They're not going to tell you what these people are really like.
No.
So yeah, it's understandable that people would be snowed by that and think, oh, well, he's saying some nice things. He must not be that bad.
When I get in front of people, honestly, Rick Larson has the personality of Jell-O, and when I get in front of people, and part of the reason is because he tries to be so measured in the way he talks to people. He doesn't want to piss off his corporate donors. And he doesn't want to tell his constituents what he really thinks. And everything is kind of let me think. You can see him like thinking for a second about how do I want to say this? Whereas I get in front of people and I'm just authentic. I'll tell you what I think. I made prefaces like some people may not want to hear this, but here's the real deal,
Yep.
And I tell people that I'm able to do that. I'm able to be honest with you. I'm able to be authentic because I don't have corporate money hanging over my shoulder. I'm not worried about, like, I talked to a local legislator here a few years ago because we were trying to push a single-payer healthcare bill. And I'm on the board of Poll Washington. We're a single-payer advocacy group here in Washington trying to get a single-payer bill passed. And I talked to a local legislator he said, "Listen, look, I support your bill. If somebody else sponsors it, I'll co-sign it. I'm not going to sponsor it myself. I'm not going to hang myself out there." He said, "Because I know if I do that, I'm going to lose money from this person, this person, and this person." And I was like, this is what's wrong. This is what is wrong. Like, you have a good piece of legislation. You say you personally support it, but you say it is not politically feasible, so I'm hands off on it because I don't want to lose the campaign funding that's going to get me reelected. And that is so destructive to democracy. I don't think people recognize how destructive to democracy that is. Like,
we need public financing of elections.
Absolutely.
And we need an outright ban on tons of things like political commercials, for crying out loud, are illegal in most of the rich world. I mean, the fact that we can dump so much money in and that they can essentially buy the people there. I mean, it's one thing to see, and you get like, okay, in high school history texts, they'll tell people about, the Teapot Dome scandal. And it's like it's in the past. It's like it's some distant thing. And we've solved that now. And we don't realize it's worse today than it was then.
It's so much worse.
It's
so much
worse.
Well, when I talk to people about what my top 3 priorities are, I always say, I go Medicare for all, Green New Deal, and Green New Deal encompasses a whole bunch of things, but tackling the climate issues and corruption in politics, getting corporate money out of politics, and getting public financing of elections will in itself start the healing for all of the other issues.
It will solve so many problems. I mean, most Americans don't really want constant war, and most Americans do want universal health care. You'll only get them if we get the corruption out of there.
Yeah. And the climate situation has become so dire that NOAA has now said, we're going to get a foot sea level rise. And I talked to in 30 years, right? And I talked to just like I did this morning, I talked to my constituents about our 500 miles of coastline and how many climate refugees we're going to have in our own district, right? Not to mention around the world. We people wanted to know how I felt about, refugees. And the first thing I talked about was like, you know what, I'm glad there's this outpouring of support for Ukrainian refugees. Now let's talk about Palestinians. Let's talk about Syrians. Let's talk about Somalis that we're still bombing. Let's talk about the Afghan refugees. Let's talk about refugees that aren't white and how we have a markedly different response to those kind of refugees than we do to the Ukrainian refugees. So all support to the Ukrainian refugees. But, if we want to really be serious about the refugee crisis, recognize that's a very, very small part of it. And I talked about our situation at the border and how a lot of people in Central and South America are fleeing economic depression, and they're fleeing, right-wing governments, a lot of them, and they have been historically for 40 years, like political oppression. That's all happening because of our foreign policy. That's happening because we have meddled in governments over the last 60 to 70 years, in particular in our own hemisphere, because we want to have this sort of, certainly Pacific hegemony, but our Western Hemisphere hegemony, but extending around the world, dozens of countries in Africa and Asia and Europe as well. So it's almost as if the refugee crisis is of our own making. And now when we talk about climate refugees, that is of our own making also. Like in 30 years, Bangladesh and Vietnam are going to be underwater. What are you where do you expect 400 million people to go? So I talk to them in a way, so I'm being authentic with them about like, we need to think 30 years ahead about how we're going to deal with these problems. Local transportation issues, making sure that, our district is all coast, like all of our population, lives right on the coastline in my district. Those houses are going to be underwater. They're going to be sinking in the mud 30 years from now. So what are we going to do to make sure that all those people are moved where, further inland? I mean, these are the we talk about this sort of infrastructure as like little fixes here and there. Like, we need big picture, future planning on what's going to happen with the climate.
And we're not going to get there as long as we've got all the new Dems, and as long as we've got like the whole DLC type approach to this thing,
right?
Because you're essentially we're being ruled by conservatives who don't really see the problem, and they want us to stop dreaming big. And to me, it's so profoundly unpatriotic, because we used to have leaders that would tell Americans, we can do anything, dream big, shoot for the moon. And now you've got people like Pelosi saying, I just don't think we can do that. And you should just moderate your expectations. I'm like, really, that's the best we can do now when we have such serious issues. I mean, in this country, it's not just a few coast areas that are going to be a problem. Just given the humidity in places like the Southeast, you take it across this century here, and you're going to have a ton of heat waves that will literally kill all mammal life. Large parts of the Southeast will be uninhabitable. And that's the same situation that'll happen much sooner in parts of the Arab world and in large parts of West Africa. So you're talking hundreds of millions of people are going to have to leave. And where are they going to go? And it's not like there isn't space. It's not like you're not going to be able to green certain areas. It's not like tons of, Canada's going to have a ton of much better land as it warms up.
Right. Exactly.
Poor people up there. They're going to have to go somewhere. I mean, I actually, because my fields straddle a line between the Mideast and Europe, and I have tons of contacts across there, and people are always talking to me about this. I was literally helping, and hello NSA if you're listening. I was literally helping people find their way out of these countries and how to break laws in order to get into European countries in the first place, because they were closing down every possible way out. And you just can't make it. I mean, the population of Lebanon almost doubled because so many people were just packed into there. They have to go somewhere else. The countries in the area cannot support the population that's pouring in. And it's not like, Europeans were freaking out about their refugee crisis. They've absorbed as many Ukrainians in a couple of weeks as they absorbed, Arabs in the last 10 years.
Right.
They never had a problem with the absorbing of people. They just had a problem of political will because they were afraid of pissing off the xenophobes.
That's all. It's the same thing happens in this country.
Exactly. It's exactly the same story here. And it's the same story we have around the border issues and everything else, and why so many Democrats are absolutely terrible on the border. It's not like Biden's dismantled those concentration camps. They're still there because there's still money to be made from all the private companies involved in there. There's still tons of cash to be made there. And they all want to say, we're strong on the border, so you don't need to vote for the Republicans because we'll be plenty racist for you. Like, is that really the best we can do?
You know, if we really wanted to not have a refugee crisis, we would be helping these, like, our corporations, not exploiting countries. We would be really provide. I mean, let's talk about the vaccine issue with the vaccine patents, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we could not get back. We would not give countries around the world the formulas to make their own vaccines because our vaccine company and how devastating that is. You know, in this globe that we have, where we're all associated with each other in some way or another, you know, just to have that sort of, you know, poverty racism or sorry, how would you describe it? That, you know, it's a xenophobia issue, but it's also like a profit issue. Mm-hmm. I'm not being very articulate about it, but not just saying, yeah, go ahead and produce your own vaccines because your health means our health as well,
right?
And it's the same thing with climate issues mm-hmm. and economic issues. That, you know, the health of your economy, the health of your environment is important to us also, because mm-hmm. if we are destroying your country for our profit, when your country collapses, you're going to come here, you know. Mm-hmm. And so we don't want people to come here. And I don't care. I want people to come here. I love, you know.
This country has one of, like, the lowest, like, population densities of anywhere in the rich world. We have space.
You know, but I just love all people and all cultures. And, you know, I you know, there's something to learn from everybody. Mm-hmm. So I don't have any of that, like, you know, whatever prejudices so many Americans have about other countries and other cultures, you know. But, you know, if you're simply talking about we don't want refugees to come here, then what are we going to do to make sure that they're stable, you know, and not exploited? Mm-hmm. Because so much of what goes on in other countries comes from the fact that we are exploiting their resources.
I totally get you on the fine line there. I mean, there is a balance, because, you know, on the one hand, you're not saying people shouldn't have the right to come here. We don't want people to come here, because I love it. I mean, when they were saying during the elections, oh, there'll be a taco truck on every street, I'm like, great, sign me up. I want a taco truck on every street, because that diversity only makes this country better. I love how much this country's improved because it is growing more diverse. But, you know, people should have the right to stay where they want to stay. And people do want to stay in their homes. People live in the most marginal environments around the world, and they're not in a big hurry to leave. People haven't poured out of desert countries in the Middle East. They're staying there because that's where they were born.
They tend to leave when they are in extreme circumstances. Right. And those extreme circumstances tend to be caused by us.
Right. Yeah. It's and if we just, how long has so many of these things been going on, that you've had massive corporate exploitation, you know, overthrowing governments, propping up, you know, dictatorships with secret police, you know, that are torturing mm-hmm. people out there and then forcing them to roll back. And it's not just the extreme examples. Tons of our international agreements actually allow us to put tremendous amount of pressure on countries to, like, weaken their environmental standards, weaken their labor policies. You know, you want an IMF loan? Cool. You need to destroy your labor unions, because that's the only way to get our cash.
Talking about these very wonky issues with the Democratic group, you know, when we had that conversation about immigration, I had exactly the same conversation.
Yeah, I mean, you want people to be able. I mean, you get people all the time saying, well, they should just stay and fight for their own country. Like, cool. It'd be easier for them to fight for their own country if we weren't training their secret police and selling them killer drones, you know? And if we weren't allowing our corporations to hire mercenaries to kill people. I mean, you know, how many people are paying attention to the abuses in, like, the Niger Delta, with oil companies just literally shooting labor organizers outright?
Well, and they've been bragging about it. And Chevron has been doing that. Chevron and Shell, I think, are the big offenders in Africa there. But, you know, if you remember Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was murdered in I think it was 1997 now. It's been so long. But that was all about just local activists who were, you know, trying to preserve their own environment.
Right.
And trying to not be exploited, like
Yeah.
people standing up,
taking care of their own lives and their own countries. And you want to say we should, yeah, that they should do that?
Literally murder people.
Yeah. I mean, if you want people to be able to fight for their own homes, great. Stop arming their oppressors. I mean, hell, the whole issue with Iran, and God, one of the things that pissed me off back when Larson did vote for preemptive war with Iran. Sure, you can do whatever you want to Iran. I mean, the fact that we've never forgiven them for overthrowing our pet dictator, I mean, it's a completely artificial conflict.
After we overthrew theirs.
Right. We overthrew an elected government.
After overthrew their democratically elected.
Right. We overthrew a democratically elected government, imposed a 25-year vicious dictatorship, trained their secret police to torture people, and then when they had the chutzpah to overthrow our pet dictator, we've never forgiven them, despite the fact that we have far more in common with ordinary Iranians than we have with large parts of the population in the Arab Gulf that we're like so close to.
And Iranians are very westernized in their thought. You know, people don't. This is what I was a high school math teacher, and I taught at every opportunity. I taught about the history of mathematics, like where does this come from? And I always referenced, and you know, I taught from '99 to 2018, and I taught during the, you know, obviously all the warring going on, and I really said, you know. Baghdad was the literal seat of world culture in around 800 AD. You know, like the technological and mathematical scientific discoveries, you know, advancements. That part of the world, it led the world. When Europe was in the Dark Ages, you know, Baghdad was literally the seat of world learning. And I think we forget that, you know, there's a long time to human history, and everybody in the world has contributed in some way, you know, to the overall benefit of humankind.
Yeah, and it's so easy for people to fall for. You know, well, yeah, but we just fall into these like you know, the kind of like easy traps, you know, like, well, Iran bad, you know, like Iran's a bad guy, and we just never question them. This is why, again, we need to break that bipartisan consensus on constant war. You know, you want to talk about Iranians in the streets in 1978 chanting death to America. How about we deal with the fact that the United States government has never apologized for shooting down a civilian airliner and killing more than 200 Iranians.
Right.
Oops. I mean, it's one thing to have fucked up. I mean, if we didn't do it deliberately, okay, we should apologize for it. But it's like they don't deserve an apology. They're not even human. And this is, again, bipartisan. We're not dealing with this history at all. And I think that the American people deserve to know who's leading them on these issues.
Well, and that is something that is really concerning me about what's going on with the Russian-Ukraine war right now is, you know, the fierce demonization of Russians. I mean, we've got Russian immigrants in my town. Everybody does, you know, and the you know, I saw the thing about, I posted on this somewhere, but you know, the fact that Facebook made it okay, like they took off, you know, you're not supposed to threaten or whatever, and Facebook actually made it okay to issue threats to Russian people. Like, who is this for? What good does this do? How does this help us towards any problem? But, you know,
well, we know what it's good for, actually, because the more you feed into that fear and the more you manipulate fear and hatred and anger among Americans, the easier it is to march to war.
Sure.
So it serves the interest of the military-industrial complex and all these corporations at all, you know? I mean,
somewhat rhetorical, but
yeah.
You know, but yeah, I mean...
it doesn't serve the people at all, though.
Yeah, us people on the ground here, that's where it always, you know, I always think about what good does that do us in our day-to-day lives. I mean, I go down to my Russian grocery and I get smoked mackerel. I don't have a damn thing against them, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not the people. This is one of the things that offends me. I mean, Russia's now the most sanctioned country on the planet, you know, more than like North Korea or anybody else, you know, and more than the Iranians. I mean, not to mention, I mean, Iran shouldn't have the sanctions it does, but never mind. But still, Russia just shot way ahead because she got so many countries on board with it. Some of them are so severe. And I'm just like, did people learn nothing at all from 500,000 dead kids in Iraq? that
Yeah.
sanctions only kill ordinary people and they strengthen the hands of dictators, because the more an economy
Absolutely.
contracts, the more they become dependent upon the strong authorities to distribute food and medicine and keep the power on. They're less likely to stand up to their own government.
Right. And in a country like Russia, you see those people who have been marching in the streets and protesting in St. Petersburg and Moscow and other places against Putin's actions. I can't imagine that the majority of Russians are like, whoa, this is a really bad thing that we are doing here. And in a society that is, it's pretty military, I guess it's pretty police controlled, that they are really risking more
Yes.
than we are.
Oh, yeah.
To get out and protest our government. These people are risking getting out in the street, and I know that there have been a lot of arrests. Now, you take those people who are willing to put their own personal safety on the line to protest this autocratic oligarch in Vladimir Putin, who is obviously on the wrong side of this issue with an invasion, and then you start slapping sanctions on them.
Mm-hmm.
What is that going to do to their willingness to resist? Because honestly, I think Putin has well overplayed his hand here. I've said this a lot of places that I talk about. He's well overplayed his hand, and the best chance we have for removing him from power is going to come from his own the Russian Duma and the people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if the people are out protesting, then their representatives in the Duma are going to feel more emboldened to stand up to Putin and have him deposed. I don't know if you saw this video where Putin was dressing down one of his ministers and telling him, "Give me a straight." Did you see that video?
Yeah.
That minister of his was scared. You saw the fear in his face, like he was going to say the wrong thing. He was going to get taken out back and shot in the head.
It's not like that hasn't happened.
Right. So people are living in fear over there under Putin. But you either got two pathways to get rid of Putin. You're either going to go to war, and then you're going to end up with a nuclear war, which doesn't serve anybody, particularly the people of Ukraine, since that's where it's going to happen. Or you do what you can to support the Russian people and I'm not talking about like real subversive shit like we do all the time, but I'm saying like, don't sanction these people so that they have the freedom,
right?
That their lives aren't further curtailed and that they have the freedom to move against their own leadership.
Right. After a long decline, and people forget just how bad this was. It's honestly only the prices of gas and oil that have allowed the Russian economy to bounce back at all. Russia's a petro state at this point. Right. It has an extremely weak overall economy. And I mean, honestly, the Soviet state was always much weaker economically than people tend to think. But the Russian state collapsed. Living standards collapsed. The population has fallen considerably, since the fall of the Soviet Union. The population in Russia, living standards were going down, lifespans were going down. It's finally started to pick back up in recent years and has begun climbing again. You pile on tons of sanctions, it reverses that. It crushes the economy. More people are out of work. And if you're out of work, you're dependent on the state. The more you're dependent on the state because of that shrinking economy, the less likely you are to get out in the streets and do it. So to me, it's hard to credit this. I'm always like of two minds on this, and I will probably never make up my mind on it, but because it probably just varies from person to person anyway. But it's hard to look at these things and look at the long record of this and the times that this happens. The same things happen over and over again. It's that whole historian's curse. You're like condemned to see the same mistakes repeated again and again. We keep doing the same things and having the same predictable results. So either A, we are governed by complete freaking morons, or B, we are governed by genuinely evil people who do not care that this is going to have this negative effect because it serves their interests. It serves the moneyed interests on this. If you can keep Russia antagonistic, this is one of the things that infuriates me the most about it. And it's hard to raise because Putin himself has been talking about NATO expansion. He's given a bunch of other dishonest reasons for the invasion, like denazification, and he's lying there. But he's got kind of a point on the NATO thing. Again, not all of it, but the fact that they were opening up increasingly to cooperation since the 1980s. I mean, Gorbachev and Reagan ended the Cold War. And then Gorbachev refused to prop up any of the states in Eastern Europe. He let them all go their own way across 89. And the Cold War was over. Then the Soviet Union collapses outright and they start reforming and we start getting involved there, right? So what happens? We end up pushing for an expansion of NATO all the way to their borders. Yep. And we help to elevate Putin. Putin takes power in 1999. This is not a coincidence. You end up getting a radical nationalist because it was very easy to spin this as it wasn't the Cold War and it wasn't an anti-Soviet and it wasn't an economic thing. They just hate Russians. Now, again, not really the reason, but it was very easy for a nationalist to spin a narrative that way. And we gave him that ammunition. We created Putin by doing that.
Well, George Bush, he looked into his eyes and he saw his soul. I believe he's an honest man. All of that. Anyway, so there is so much blowback from our own foreign policy. When you talk about that A-B choice, I honestly lean towards B, and I lean towards B because of the profit that comes from the military. Listen, I'm sure you've seen the movie The Corporation, right? That is a seminal documentary on anti-corporatist.
Everyone should see that.
Everybody should see that. But the reality is, if tobacco companies can lie about tobacco and know they're killing people, sure, of course, Raytheon and Boeing and Lockheed Martin and their military wings, and of course there's so much money to be made there that of course that they're gonna steer things in that direction. So if you want to call that evil, I'll call it evil. Yeah,
you have corporations involved in the media that control large chunks of the mainstream media that also manufacture weapons, because we're down to 5 multinational corporations controlling 85% of what we see, and a lot of them, go figure, also manufacture nukes. So it's going to have some kind of an impact on what they're going to talk about. It doesn't take a lot of, you don't need to fall for like weird conspiracy theories to just see what's happening in front of you. But we're not going to get that from our media, and we're not going to get that from most politicians.
We've got, David Sirota masterfully put "Don't Look Up" in front of us. And how long did the fervor around that last? What, like 3 days, 4 days? And he got an Oscar. And has anything about the conversation changed at all?
No,
not a thing.
And at the very least, people might, if they see it, think, that might be something like global warming. But it applies to so many other areas. There are so many massive threats here. And, hell, even the U.S. military has been saying the climate is like the single biggest threat to our national security, but it won't change anything in Congress because they're all bought and paid for. This is one of the things I can really, take your incumbent to task on. And I love that you're doing this kind of stuff here. 69% of his funding comes from PACs, and another quarter of it comes from filthy rich people who can write those multi-$1,000 checks. Almost none of it comes from voters, because he doesn't give a shit about voters. He wants to follow the money.
Yeah. And that's true. Over his entire career, I think the number is like 53% career-wise, because he used to be a lot less PAC funded in his early years than he is now. But yeah, in the last
deeper and deeper into that swamp. The longer you're in there, 20 years in, he's met a lot of people. He knows all those corporate lobbyists, and he knows how to tell them what gets him the money.
You're exactly right. And I think, so you take a small people, just terminology, small donor, less than $200 contribution, large donor, $200 up to the max of $2,900 in a cycle. Still can't give more than that. But, he gets less than, I think career-wise, less than 6% of his funding from small donors. And my campaign, we've raised about $105,000 now. So I'm pretty happy about that. And somewhere around 85% of it comes from those small donors. I've had a few people who have kicked me some big bucks, but they're all people I know. And that's the thing. People talk about large donors. Oh, I'm uncomfortable with large donors for a candidate like myself. And I'm like, anybody who's given me a substantial amount of money, I know who they are, right? And honestly, if the CEO of some horrible corporation maxed out to me, I'd send that money back. I really would.
Right, exactly. It's a little different when
So,
your family believes in you and knows that
yeah,
you're a good person and tries to kick a little cash in, and
yeah,
a little different when you're sitting down in a room and making a deal.
yeah,
Hey, you'll get my vote for this, this particular agenda that you have. The agenda of an ordinary donor is generally, I believe in this person's policies, or I believe in this person.
yep, yep, for
But
sure.
the steadily increasing share that comes from those big corporate PACs is a significant problem. And
Yeah.
I think you hit this earlier, and I think in a way that I think is brilliant, and I wish to see a lot more candidates talking about these kind of things, because it's one thing to say, yeah, Medicare for all, Green New Deal, great, but the how do you get there is a huge obstacle, especially when the entire Democratic establishment, as well as the Republicans, are after you, as well as the media that just want to complain that, oh, Green New Deal, that means you're going to ban cow farts, right? Because that's what that means, right? We have to kill all the cows because otherwise they will fart. I hear this stuff from Fox. I'm like, are you kidding? There are people listening, and then I start hearing repeated, oh crap, people will fall for that. That's dangerous. But you're not going to get anything from any of them until that third one you mentioned. Get the money out. Get the lobbyists out. The fact that Larson was himself a lobbyist and understands that game, it helps him get him the money to get elected in the first place, but it's really dangerous for us.
Well, and it's dangerous for our democracy. I mean, it's dangerous for our democracy just on its face. But it is also actually dangerous to our lives.
Right.
I mean, I've really got a perfect example here with Larson. It's actually something that I press released on. I've been trying to sell to local media. I mean, I PR'd it to a bunch of outlets, and I'm hoping somebody will pick this up because there's a real story here. And it's something that I've been on for a couple of years. So if you remember the tragic Boeing 737 MAX crashes
Yes.
of Lion Air in Malaysia, and or Lion Air was Indonesia, but I think they crashed in Malaysia, and then Ethiopian Air. Mm-hmm. And almost 350 people died in there, passengers, crew. And those were a new Boeing jet. This was Larson, the important thing here is that Larson was the ranking member of the Aviation Subcommittee of Transportation from 2013 to 2019 when Democrats took the House back. He's now chair of aviation, right? So this is a little bit of a convoluted story, and I'm trying to figure out how to get it down to a manageable bite. But in 2005, there was a program instituted called the Organizational Design Authority Program, which basically allowed aircraft manufacturers to, they use the word streamline their own design and manufacture of parts. But basically what it was deregulating that part of the industry, that they weren't having the government look over their shoulders too much, and they could just kind of do all the things they needed to do to get an aircraft in the air. Well, the culture of Boeing after the merger with McDonnell Douglas in 1996 had really nosedived. It became a company that had gone from putting out quality products for the airline industry. And if you remember back in, the 70s and 80s, like the Boeing Pan Am Clipper and all of that. I mean, Boeing was gold standard for aircraft. But once you get that corporate culture in there that is more about financialization, and it's more about stock prices and shareholder profits and CEO salaries, the culture of Boeing really took a nosedive in terms of quality product.
Oh yeah.
And there was a situation with, Boeing had managed to get Congress to give it more authority for this design and manufacture of its own parts. And Boeing engineers themselves were very, they were worried. They're like, we're putting through stuff that is, we're not quality testing it the way we used to. But they knew if they spoke up, they risked their jobs. I mean, Boeing was literally saying, if you have any issues with any of our products, you will not put it in writing. You put it in writing, you lose your job, basically. So there was a culture of fear. And the Department of Transportation Inspector General, which is the watchdog for the industry, started getting these complaints and took them to the FAA and took them to the Aviation Subcommittee, which Larson was ranking by minority member. In fact, we have documentation of in 2013, Larson actually asking questions about this program and about these problems, and knowing that they existed, because basically you're risking getting bad parts and you're risking crashes because the quality control is no longer there. Knowing that all these problems existed and doing nothing about it, right? Doing absolutely nothing about it. So there's documented complaints from 2012 through 2015, and then in 2018, Congress actually passed legislation to give the aircraft manufacturing industry more control. This was right before that first crash.
Yep.
So all of this is documented. Now, did Larson, did he take money to look the other way? Did the money cloud his judgment on how hard he was going to press Boeing and the FAA to make sure because I mean, this is a deregulation thing, which in the end ends up, I mean, a lot of this goes back to the fact that Boeing was competing with Airbus, and they wanted to get this new design out on the market as quickly as possible. Right. And they also wanted to do it in such a way where the airlines who were buying it didn't have to put their pilots through a whole bunch of other training when they really should have. And that's how Boeing ended up selling it. So a whole bunch of stuff with what should have been a very, very heavily regulated industry, all those regulations got taken away. I shouldn't say all of them, but a lot of those regulations got taken away. And what did it lead to? You ended up with two planes crashing. They tracked it back to a faulty manufacturer, some software that didn't go right. Because the pilots hadn't been trained, they didn't know what to do when they encountered this software issue. And when you listen to black box transcripts from both of those jets, that's exactly what you're hearing. The pilots are like, I don't know what's going on, and all of this, I want to hang this around Larson's neck, because he was the person in authority, in a position to make sure those regulations were in place. And what did he do? He's taken bags of money from Boeing and other aircraft manufacturers, and he has not done his job. Aviation Subcommittee is the government regulatory body for the industry. And if you are not doing your job because you're taking that money, that's criminal. That's dereliction of duty, and that is criminal. And I don't think people understand that that's, this is the end result of corporate corruption, is like people die, whether they're being poisoned by tobacco or whether they crash, on a mountainside. That people die because our government did not do its job.
Right. Those lives are ultimately on people like Larson for not doing their job when they had an opportunity to do that job, but they chose the money. And sadly, so many of these problems, they go back quite a ways. One of the ways that I finally managed to get back into college, because, no one in my family had ever gone to college at all, totally working class family. And then somehow I ended up getting all the way to a PhD, but it took me a long time. I was a dozen years out of high school before I got into a bachelor's program. And that came after I'd managed to transition careers. I started doing a lot of computer work, ended up being relatively good at that. And, my last position in the industry was as the network manager for computers at a small aerospace company in Long Beach. And a lot of the people that were working on us, because we were developing, an experimental turboprop pusher, nice little plane. It had a lot of great things going for it until the investors pulled the plug on it and killed us. But a lot of the people there came out of, Northrop and Boeing and Douglas and all these bigger aircraft companies, and then they moved on to here because they wanted to, work on a kind of like, with a young and hungry company doing something interesting. And I get to sit down with people talking about some of the problems going back a long period. I can't remember the name of the flight there, but there was a Douglas plane that they had a known defect in the tail assemblies where things could just come apart, and we had a plane just go down in the Pacific and killed a bunch of people. And it turns out, one of the gals working at the company had been in the quality department there, and they had known about this problem. And the decision that came down was, will it be cheaper to fix the problem or cheaper to handle the lawsuits that come out of the deaths? And that's, at the end of the day, an actuarial question. And
Yep.
the only reason it comes up is because we have so changed the laws to favor corporations that they aren't going to pay out that much. They're not going to get steep fines for these things, and they can literally get away with murdering people because it's cheaper than costing the shareholders a few bucks to fix the problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, go back to that documentary, The Corporation, and that's how they start out. They start out by showing all of the fines that all of these corporations have incorporated, and in the end they say, this is a cost externalization for them. They will just write it into their bottom line, knowing that they're going to have to pay out.
Exactly.
And literally do not care about human lives.
Now, help me out in the district geography, especially with the district and all that business there. Where is Everett relative to your district?
Everett is in my district.
I thought it was close or in. So that in fact, has a lot to do with this, maybe. I mean, I don't know. It just, gosh, it seems kind of coincidental that someone who's, representing Boeing in Congress might not be paying attention to what they're doing. It kind of seems like an albatross you can hang around his neck.
I'm really hoping that we can, but it's going to take the help of local media. We've got a local paper here called The Stranger, and I've kind of fed this story to one of their political reporters. And honestly, I think, as I was telling the story, I said, look, aside from my candidacy, it may come across that I'm feeding dirt. I am just flabbergasted that nobody has actually looked at this yet. And I'm giving you an opportunity because I believe that there's a story here. Now, do I want to, kneecap Larson with this? Of course I do. I would love to, but not just for my campaign, not just because I want to win, but he is the poster child for how bad things are with the corporate corruption of our government. Like literally hundreds of people died and he was in a position to prevent it. And I do think that there needs to be that kind of, people are, you hear this with people challenging Democrats from the left challenging sitting Democrats. Well, why would you want to do that? Why wouldn't you help somebody challenge a Republican? You're going to do damage to the Democratic Party if if we have these internal, this infighting, they call it infighting. I'm like, you know what? He doesn't represent me. This is what it's about, representation. No, and I think that this district deserves better representation than they're getting.
This honestly is a way you can flip. You got to flip this stuff back on people like the New Dem Coalition and the DLC and all that stuff. The people who are doing damage to the Democratic brand are them.
Yeah.
And they don't mind more and more people leaving the party. They don't mind that 45% of the country are independent at this point. They can just compete for a smaller and smaller share, get more and more tribalistic and just not care about it. But ultimately the losers are all of us, and the more of us that know about their brand, the worse it is. Yeah, they're right. Some of that stuff can be used by Republicans, but the Republicans have plenty of their own things to go after, and they're going after a very different target audience. If Democrats really want to win, and if Democrats wanted to control the House indefinitely, what they'd have to do is open back up to that populist left. And if they get them in, there's no way, and just demographically in this country, they would have a lock on Congress again, but they won't.
Make sure people have housing and health care.
Right.
And aren't
figure.
Swimming in student debt.
Yeah, I mean, you want to understand.
That's what people want.
I mean, we had, until the Gingrich Revolution, the Democrats controlled the House for almost 40 years, almost uninterrupted. But, it starts flipping around. Go figure, right around the same time that the Democratic Party went full on corporate.
Yeah.
And it fed the drive to like the Green Party and everything else. I mean, the Greens really only took off in the mid-90s because of the Democrats. But they want to blame Nader, and they want to blame the Greens, and they want to blame, socialists and everybody else for like not supporting. Well, give us something to support.
It's interesting you say that, because in the conversation I had the other day with one of my legislative districts, they were talking about, what can we do to get young people to vote? The young people don't vote, and and it's their, and these are local party people who are very genuine about this. They're like, we really want young people to vote. I mean, listen, there are good people in the local Democratic parties.
Absolutely.
These These are like your friends and neighbors. Like
Mm-hmm.
these, I can sit down and talk about politics. So when I say the Democratic Party, I'm talking about the control, the DNC type control of the
Yes.
Democratic Party that exists at the state party level. That is an entirely different entity than the people I'm engaging with daily and
Mm-hmm.
am able to be authentic with, because we all want housing and health care,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of thing. But they're talking about, they're bemoaning the fact that young people don't vote. And I said, the answer is simple. Give them people to vote for.
Yeah.
I guarantee that if you guys help me with my campaign,
Mm-hmm.
right, you will see voters, you will see young voters turn out.
Mm-hmm.
You will see high school age kids and college age kids and that demographic up to
Mm-hmm.
29 where they're like, oh, these people don't come out to vote, and they're like, they don't care. And I said, no, they don't believe you're standing up for them. They don't
Right.
believe you're fighting for them.
Mm-hmm.
They see what goes on with this geriatric Congress that we have, that doesn't care about the fact that their climate is going off a cliff right now. The fact that they can't afford any kind of rent, that they can't, that
Right.
it's give people something to vote for. I will
Right.
get out there and my message will inspire them to go to the polls. I will give them something to vote for.
And that party leadership is not going to change on its own. It has to be forced to change. It's
Yep.
never going to choose to change because it has money coming in. It has a system that seems to work for it. And honestly, it doesn't matter as much to them if Republicans are in charge, as long as the money keeps flowing into them and as long as they're at the table.
Exactly
They
right.
have to be forced to change by changing enough of the representatives in there to change
Yep.
the balance of power. And it saddens me to see just how hard it is, even oftentimes for state and local party officials, to learn those lessons and think about these things. When in my own short attempt at being in politics, and honestly, I'm honestly still shocked that someone like me could get into politics at all. But in my short run in it, I managed to take the single, you had the best previous showing ever against that incumbent, and I got half again as many votes as he'd ever got. I got 52,000 more votes than anybody had ever gotten against that guy. And I did it almost entirely by appealing to young voters and independents, giving people something to believe in who wouldn't normally be engaged with the system. That's how you win. And I was in an R+9 district.
Wow. Yeah. And that's, it's true. And, I got 3 times as many votes as any progressive challenger to Larson has ever had.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I did not directly reach 35,000 people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even have an email list.
Right. They're talking to each other about it.
It was conversation, and
Mm-hmm.
the people that I'm having conversation with going and having conversations.
Exactly.
Like when I was up at the Bellingham Farmers Market, I remember this slightly before the primary, and they were having a parade, and I had a table set up there, and, the ballots had already gone out, and we're just trying to do last-ditch get-out the vote effort. And I had people waving to me in line, I voted for you. And I'm like, that's great. I have no idea who you are, but thank you so much, And,
Right.
and that's how we're going to win.
Right.
And that also tells me that, and this is something that I hear as I talk to a lot of supporters in the district, like, people here really don't like Larson. They don't like him as a person.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a personable person. They
Right.
don't feel like he really cares about them. That's, I think that showed up in my vote total also. Like, people were like, somebody other than Larson, but it's still a D. Yeah.
Right. Sure. There's okay, so there's 2 more things I want to hit on here before we can kind of wind back up. And one of them does have something to do with Larson there, and another just has to do with, like, I don't know, reminding people, I guess, of the kind of person you are, because I get the authenticity, the integrity that comes in there, and I really want to give you an opportunity to make that shine for a second. But on an economic question, here's something that I'm wondering about, because I don't know a lot about the demographics in your district, especially the lower income voters in there, because 2 things that really stand out for me and that really hurt in my estimation here is that a Democrat having the guts not only to publicly back that bankruptcy bill, which just completely crushed tons of people. I mean, how many people are struggling with tons of debt that they can no longer have any way of discharging? You have to sacrifice literally everything to survive there. And he was all for that. I wonder why. And then
I got a story there.
And then the whole, like, the inheritance tax thing, the estate tax part, which, I mean, is paid by a fraction of 1%. This isn't even supporting the top 1%. This is supporting a fraction of the 1% that have to pay the estate tax, most Americans don't do it. The Republicans are brilliant about calling it the death tax and making it sound like everyone has to do it, because most of us don't pay a great deal of attention to how the taxes really work. And you don't understand that the bill they're actually talking about affects almost nobody. But to see Democrats happily support something like that that's only going to benefit the super rich, how does this impact people in your district?
Well, I think a lot of people in my district don't. I mean, if you're talking about what is their cognizance of the whole issue, I don't think something like the estate tax is on their mind. And the only thing that I can think of is that, when we talk about, he gets a substantial portion of his money from large individual donors. Mm-hmm. So those are the people who are thanking him for, voting to repeal the estate tax. I mean, that's the only sense it makes for me from the Democratic perspective. I mean, that is a wild one and should just be. It seems
unconscionable to do so.
Wildly out of whack with Democratic Party priorities. I mean, well, and this is another thing. Like, I direct your viewers to my website again, the Rich Receipts tab on my website. We've actually got 2 documents on there. One details all of his corporate money and votes, and the other one details his opposition, like his voting record opposition to stated Democratic Party platform values. And one of them is the estate tax. Like, Democrats support the repeal of the estate tax. Why did Larson vote against it? And there's just a whole slew of things where he doesn't align with it. So that one makes no sense to me. The bankruptcy bill is actually the piece of legislation that set me in motion against him back in 2005. So it's kind of poignant that you bring that one up, because I was a high school teacher, and I saw sort of this convergence of this massive push to have all students go to college, right? Mm-hmm. That came along with this bill that said, when you're stuck in college debt, too bad, you got to pay it off, right? And I saw the bill come through right before the big push, because the bill was 2005, and then it was more like 2007, 2008 that this massive push to get everybody in college came around. It was noticeable. If you were a school mm-hmm. teacher, high school teacher at that time, you were like, oh, wow, our mission is now to make sure everybody is college ready.
There's money in it now for somebody.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, and when, one of the things sort of to characterize Larson and the way he deals with things when he's challenged. So in 2005, I was at a local baseball stadium. He was holding a town hall there, and I was fortunate enough to be the last person to get the microphone. There were hundreds of people there. And I asked him about that because, it came at my perspective as a high school teacher, like, you're hurting my students right now. They're going to take these loans out. A lot of them, are going to drop out in the first year or two because, they weren't prepared, or they decided they want to do something else. And now they're stuck with tens of thousands of dollars of debt that they can't get rid of. And I basically said, can you explain your vote on that bill? And his response to me was along the lines, this is like 17 years ago now, was along the lines of, the people in Washington, D.C. who write these pieces of legislation know more than you do. I mean, it was the most condescending, I was just like, well, that is a highly unsatisfactory answer. Yeah. And I've actually tangled up with him over, like, I remember I was at a debate watching party with him in 2016, and Bernie and Hillary were on debate, and Hillary raised Barney Frank as as somebody who was a mentor on her, and I was actually sitting right behind Larson. And I was like, Barney Frank has taken more money for the banking industry than anybody else ever in Congress. And Larson turns around and he's like, oh, so you think you know more than Barney Frank, do you? And I was like, what I know is Barney Frank has taken more money from the banking industry than anybody else in Congress ever. That's what I know. So don't tell me about Barney Frank and that Hillary Clinton is leaning on this guy as her mentor on financial issues.
That's two that hit me really hard too, because and this is something that I thought was honestly amusing about trying to get into politics at all, because here I am, literally a college professor. And because of the way that I'm interacting with people, it was very difficult to get that whole Democratic elitism thrown at me unless they do not know me at all. Anybody who's seen me, anybody who's talked to me, anybody who's following me, I didn't get that crap from anybody. But because it's honestly an area that I think that we've handed so much red meat to the Republican Party to allow them to basically capture a bit of that populist fire the Democrats used to have, that we had
It's what
at the
won
beginning of the
Trump.
century, where
How
we
Trump
used to
won.
run, as the party of the people, speaking
Yeah.
for ordinary people. I mean, hell, Harry Truman didn't even go to college. The Republicans used to be the unabashed elitist party, and now they're embracing this neo-fascist populist right view where they can claim to speak for the ordinary person. And that,
Right.
honestly, that sounds good to working people who think that Washington is out of touch. And when you have a Democrat saying, you don't know as much about these issues, you should just stay in your own lane, to me,
Yeah.
it's the kind of thing that
say,
Tim Pot dictators say. It's not the kind of thing I want from our party.
When the Bernie movement kind of took over local parties here in my area in 2016, we all kind of ran for local chairs, local this, local that, and there were enough of us who had kind of front loaded ourselves as members, and PCOs that we did, like I said, I was elected to the state committee, but Larson came to my local legislative district for an early endorsement in 2016, and we denied it to him. And the reason we denied it to him was he wouldn't answer the questions that we wanted to talk to him at that time, particularly about the TPP. And we knew he supported the TPP, and we knew he supported fast tracking it. But he said, I don't have to talk about the TPP because it's not pending legislation. And we said, well, there's your answer right there. If you feel like you don't have to talk to us about something that we want to know, that's it. You're done. And we didn't endorse him. That was it.
Yeah, and honestly, we need a lot more of that. This is one of the things that I've tried to encourage so many people to do. If they're upset by these issues, don't, hitch yourself just to these kind of rising stars nationally. Get involved in local politics, run for city council, get involved in local party politics, take control of these things. Because honestly, if you can get control over county parties, then that gives you a way to take control of the state parties. If you take control of the state parties, you have a way of scuppering the endorsement of the worst offenders.
It would be so easy to do. I think California's system is more complicated than Washington, but I'll tell you what, all it takes in Washington is bodies willing to show up for a couple of meetings and cast votes, right?
Right.
You can have your leaders I would just go to say to people, you don't have to trust me, but if you trust me, here's what you need to do. And if enough people did that, we completely changed the face of the Democratic Party in Washington.
Yeah.
But we're honestly fighting against the people. A lot of the people who feel the way you and I do about issues, they're strapped, man. They're strapped financially. They're strapped for their time. They're like, man, showing up to party meetings. And these party meetings they can drag. I was the meeting I was in this morning was 3 hours long. Well, who has that, on a Saturday morning? I'm doing this because I actually do have the time and enough interest to do it. But I don't judge people for not wanting to do that, man. That's right. It is tedious. But there is a minimum level of interaction that, can I lay it out for you? Here's what you'd have to do. I can make it super easy for you. You do have to show up to a couple of meetings, but I'll make that as painless as possible for you. And then you can scoot, and if you trust me to be the leader, and the other people around me to be the leaders, we'll take it from there. But we got to get you to get us in. That's how voting works. I mean, that's just whipping votes right there.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not just getting people to step up and run, but getting people to step up and support them, whether it's throwing in the price of a coffee a month, whether it's showing up to a meeting, whether it's themselves running for a council or just putting out signs, anything. If we want change and we don't want to be ruled by these out of touch, millionaires, then we have to be willing to step up and put a little effort into that. So here's a nice easy one for you here, because I know we've been talking for a while here, and apologies to everyone who's listening to this. I know you guys are used to me being fairly long-winded, but I get into these. I enjoy these conversations a lot, and I
think I'm pretty long-winded too. So.
Yeah, and it's hard here too, because I really respect what Jason's doing.
It's a good conversation. I love it.
Yeah. So here's a good one here. If you are elected, so say you get the chance to replace Larson, you're running against him in the general, you end up replacing him, and you take that seat, would you pledge to hold accountable individuals of either party for their actions, for their votes, for the cash that they're taking?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm doing it. I'm doing it right now as I'm running my campaign. In fact, I don't know if you've seen me post about this, but I've been pretty vocal about this on Twitter. I would not join the Progressive Caucus. The way the Progressive Caucus is right now, I feel like there's a handful at best of members of that caucus that are what I would consider actually progressive.
Right.
You've got the squad, and I know people have their issues with the squad over this and that, but there's still, I am still down.
They're still progressives.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still down for AOC raking corporate CEOs, over the coals, and she's pretty masterful at that. So she has, I don't think a lot of people think she's just sold out. I don't think she's fully sold out. I do think she needs support. I think she's got a lot of potential and she needs support there, and I would be there to support her. And a particular favorite of mine is Rashida Tlaib. I was really hoping, honestly, in the primary last time around, I really, really wish that Bernie had just, after the third caucus, he just said, Rashida's my running mate. And that would have been absolutely golden, I think,
Yeah, no, Rashida's great.
She is. And she is willing to call people motherfucker. That's one of the things that I love about
former trucker, I can respect.
Yeah. So, I want to hold people accountable. And I would not join the Progressive Caucus because, there are new Dems holding dual caucus membership there.
Right.
And the new Democrats, that was an explicitly free trade caucus. That was, you go back far enough and that caucus came out of Koch brother money. The Koch brothers wanted Democrats who were going to vote on free trade issues. That's where the new Democrats come from. Yep. That's their whole purpose, is they're a free trade. So I don't understand, that is explicitly anti-progressive, and how they can hold dual membership in the Progressive Caucus. There's well over a dozen members of the Progressive Caucus, like maybe even 20, who get more than 50% of their money from corporate PACs, and some that you would be surprised at, like Nanette Barragan. She gets more than half of her money from corporate PACs, and I'm like, is she supposed to be really, really progressive? So,
right.
So I'm very, very concerned. Like Adam Smith, how the hell are you going to let Adam Smith, the freaking chair of House Armed Services, who is on that ACU scale, that American Conservative Union scale, he's more conservative than Larson. He's like the 23rd most conservative Democrat in Congress over 26 years, and he's got membership in the Progressive Caucus. It makes no sense at all.
Well, it's marketing. It's ultimately marketing because the word doesn't mean anything to a lot of these people as they use it. I mean, Nancy Pelosi calls herself a progressive, and she's like, I think, second or third worst offender in the entire House for the whole insider trading, enriching yourself because you know what's happening here. It's deeply corrupt. It's as anti-progressive as it gets, and she has a very conservative voting record in many ways. Well, and yet
she's not a member of the Progressive Caucus,
but she calls herself a progressive. She uses the name a lot. Right.
Now,
it's just a label that they can use. And and most of us, again, do not have the time to sit there and comb through the records. So we have to depend upon a media. Well, the media is lying to us. So it gets harder and harder. So.
Well, I make this guarantee. One, I'm not going to join the Progressive Caucus, but people like me, let's take Shahid Buttar, Shervin Azami down in Southern California, or any number of progressives who may get elected. I'm going to stand outside of the Progressive Caucus, and I'm going to ask people to join me. And I will be very explicit about why I'm not joining the Progressive Caucus. Progressive Caucus wants to tighten up its rules for membership. I might step into it, but I'm not going to sit in the same caucus as Adam Smith and pretend that we share the same values.
Exactly, because we absolutely do not share the same values. Yeah. No, I agreed.
So I and maybe I'll get some attention there, standing on the outside, and even if I'm the only one, I'll stand there by myself. And
that's the thing to do. And honestly, it's one of the things that I think people underestimate consistently, the power of the seats in the first place, getting in there. This is one of the reasons that it's hard for me to kind of like shit on AOC, because she's going to have to make compromises. Everyone does, but she is able consistently to be a voice and advocate in the media for extremely progressive ideas and to push the conversation nationally in ways that only is going to help us all. And the more people you have doing that, the more it tips the overall scale there, and the fewer compromises you actually have to make within your own party.
Well, people ask me, oh, your ideas, right? Your ideas are not going to gel with the rest of Congress. How do you expect to get anything passed? And I'm very honest with them. Like me as a single individual, I might not be able to get anything done.
Mm-hmm.
I might go in and I might spend 2 years banging my head against the wall, and all the things that I want to get passed, none of them pass. But here's the thing. You can't impeach and you can't recall a representative, right? And so if I spend 2 years being extremely damn loud about the things that we need to be damn loud about, because again, our climate is in breakdown now. They're not even calling it climate emergency anymore. Like the recent IPCC report from a week ago, they're calling it climate breakdown right now. And so I'm going to stand there and I'm going to yell really loud about climate breakdown and the housing crisis and the fact that we've got 30 million people who can't see a doctor still. And sure, like you said, I'm going to have to make some votes that are compromising, but will I be the person who holds up a piece of legislation if it's a shitty piece of legislation? You're damn right I will, right? And I think people wanted that with force the vote. I was opposed to force the vote at the time. In retrospect, I might not be, I would say moving forward, I'm not opposed to it. And even in retrospect, I can say, I might have been wrong about that one. Maybe they should have stood up.
Yeah, I really wish we'd seen more of that. I had a hard time watching people cave on issues like that because, at the end of the day, it's kind of a stunt. Yeah, it's not really going to change a whole lot, but it gets attention. It's an opportunity to talk about things. It's an opportunity to explain something on the news. And, honestly, you do have to wade into that lion's den. I had a great deal of respect for Bernie going on Fox for that town hall, and he had a Fox crowd cheering him. Having the integrity to push your positions, to not back down is respectable. And if you have that bully pulpit, you get the ability to push that needle a bit. And I think we need a lot more of that. So, I think, the viewers here know I'm a fan. I want to see your campaign do well here. And I definitely want to see you do a whole lot better than last time around and give Larson a hell of a run for it. So how do people support you? You tell them websites, social media, anything like that. How do they find you and help out?
So everything is Call for Congress. So you can see how my name is spelled back there. CALL. FOR, not the number 4. Everything is Call for Congress. I'm on Twitter, Instagram. I don't do much on Instagram except post what I posted on Twitter. But, that's
I do
what
the same
Instagram
thing.
is for, I guess. I still have not figured Instagram out a whole lot. I'm not on TikTok. I do have a TikTok account, but I'm just not very good at it. And to do really good TikToks, you have to kind of put a lot of time into them, I think.
Yeah.
And I just don't have the time to do that. My Facebook is Call for Congress. And my website, really check out my website because I have very detailed positions.
Absolutely.
I am in the process of, thanks to Sema Hernandez, who ran for Senate in Texas a couple of years ago in 2020, she is translating my website into Spanish, and so we should have a full Spanish translation because we do have a lot of immigrant Spanish speaking agricultural workers in my district. My district is actually pretty rural. In many places, and I am definitely open to appeal to those that demographic, and hoping to do a couple of other translations along the way, but definitely for Spanish, and I want people to check out the Rich Receipts. If you want to know how bad a good Democrat can be, all you need to do is read Rick's Receipts, and you will see how bad a good Democrat can be. You can volunteer, you can donate. If you're in my district or if you know people in my district, please share. Help me get out the word. We've got literature printed. We're hitting the streets. I'm already distributing literature around the district for people to go walk around their neighborhoods. We'd love to have more help there. But I want to say we don't have. I think my win number this year. I can probably put it around 55,000 votes. We had 35,000 last year. We missed the ballot by 2,500 votes. And if I can secure 55,000 votes this year, I'm a lock for the number 2 position, which means I get to go head to head with Larson for 3 months.
Right on, which honestly isn't a huge jump up from that because you do have more name recognition. You don't have to fight to keep the people that you already had. So you're just reaching out to expand that. And the more attention we can get out there, you get those votes. And then it's a lot easier to get attention and get some of the cash in there. At that point, it's easier to get groups like Justice Dems and whatnot to take you seriously. Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
That's what we need.
And the reality is, when people get a chance to engage with me, and I don't, honestly, I'm a pretty humble guy. Maybe I don't come across that way, but when I engage with people and I have these honest conversations with them, they tend to like me, even if they did not come into the conversation. The San Juan Democrats, San Juan County, they gave me about an hour and a half to speak with them. They were just like, we want to know what Jason Call is all about. And they recorded the whole thing. And this was after Larson had talked for half an hour and, very stilted, trying not to step the wrong direction and say the wrong thing. But we just had honest and open conversation about these districts. And those people were clapping for me at the end of it. When it was like time to go, I mean, I had people, doing this, and I was like, that was not a person who was a supporter of mine when we started that conversation, we might not agree on every issue, but I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be transparent. If we've got to come to some compromises on some things, there are some things I'm not budging on. And then there are some things like, okay, let's see if we can find the best way forward that works for everybody. So, you got to take each issue as it comes. But I'm a straight shooter and I'm not compromised by any corporate money. That I am working for you. That is all I care about, is to work for the health of my constituents and work for the health of this planet.
And that's the way to do it. Honestly, I had tons of people come at me telling me that they self-identified as conservatives, that they had never supported a Democrat at all, and telling me they knew I was a leftist, and not just a Democrat, that I was a leftist. And they were on board, and they were telling me, I don't agree with you on a lot of the issues, but I respect the integrity. I respect that you're not going to lie to me. I respect that you're going to arrive and talk to me. And I think we completely misunderstand just how important that is to a lot of voters. Most voters aren't as ideological as you think they are. Some of them are tribalistic, and those folks aren't going to budge. Most voters are much more interested in what you're talking about, who you are, your story, your beliefs, your integrity, how authentic you are. This is one of the reasons that people like Bernie had so many conservative backers. He had literal Republican backers. And
my dad who ended up voting for Trump told me, he said, I would have voted for Bernie.
Yes.
He said, I think he's batshit crazy. I don't do his ideas, but there's no way. He said, but I know Trump's a fool and a charlatan, and there's no way I'm going to vote for Hillary. So,
right.
But he would have voted for Bernie.
Right. And a lot of people would have. And again, it's a lot of that has to do with the integrity. I've had a lot of conservatives tell me they respect the fact that he's had the same positions for a long time, even if they disagree with them. The fact that Bernie was calling for marriage equality in the 1970s puts him so far ahead of the curve is just, and he's consistent on these points. He hits the same things. And regardless of whether you like the idea or not, you're willing to listen and to take someone serious. And I think we need a lot more of that in our politics. We need more of that authenticity. So I'm happy to cheer that on everywhere I see it. So one of the reasons that I've enjoyed this conversation and I've enjoyed following your campaign. So thank you for what you're doing.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So we'll say goodnight here. Thank you very much for your time. And, everyone go and check out callforcongress.com. Check this stuff out and, follow Jason on social media and have a great night, everyone.